The rain fell relentlessly that night, blanketing the mountain highway in a shimmering sheet of water. The air was thick with fog, and the only sound besides the pounding rain was the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers. Inside the small sedan, a young woman named Emily gripped the steering wheel tightly. Her face was pale, and her knuckles turned white from tension. She glanced into the rearview mirror at her baby, a 6-month-old boy named Oliver, bundled up in his car seat. His soft whimpers had just quieted after a long stretch of crying, and Emily sighed in relief. "Just a little further, sweetheart," she whispered. The isolation of the road, coupled with the oppressive darkness, made her uneasy. She had made this trip before, but never in such terrible weather. As she rounded a sharp curve, her headlights illuminated the silhouette of a deer standing motionless in the middle of the road. Its eyes glowed eerily, reflecting the car's beams. Emily gasped, slamming her foot on the brake and jerking the steering wheel to the side. The tires skidded against the wet asphalt, screeching as the car spun out of control. Emily screamed, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. The sedan veered off the road, smashing through a wooden guardrail and tumbling down a slope into the forest below. Branches cracked and shattered against the car as it plummeted, finally coming to a violent halt against the base of a massive oak tree. The impact shook the forest, scattering birds into the rainy night sky. Inside the car, a haunting silence fell. Emily's head rested against the deflating airbag, her breathing shallow and uneven. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead, mixing with the rainwater seeping through the shattered windows. A faint, fragile cry broke the stillness. Oliver, still strapped in his car seat, was miraculously unharmed, save for a few scratches. His tiny fists flailed in the air, his wails piercing through the patter of rain. The car, crumpled and tilted on its side, had protected him from the worst of the crash. Emily stirred faintly, but could not summon the strength to respond. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, catching sight of her son through the cracked mirror. A single tear rolled down her cheek before her head fell back, her strength fading. Outside, the rain continued to pour, washing away the tracks of the car's descent. The highway above was silent, devoid of passing vehicles or witnesses. The forest seemed alive, the rustling leaves and distant howls of animals creating a symphony of nature's indifference to the human tragedy. Unbeknownst to Emily and Oliver, a pair of eyes watched from the shadows. A massive bear, its fur soaked and glistening, emerged cautiously from the underbrush. The scent of blood and the baby's cries had drawn it to the wreckage. It stood on its hind legs, towering over the scene, and let out a low, guttural growl as it approached the car. Its dark eyes scanned the crumpled vehicle before focusing on the tiny form of the baby. The cries grew louder as the bear sniffed the air, tilting its head as if trying to understand the situation. The forest fell silent once more as the bear reached into the wreckage, its massive paws surprisingly gentle. With one careful motion, it began to pull the baby from the car seat, cradling the fragile life as if it understood the weight of its actions. And then, as the rain continued to fall, the bear turned and disappeared into the forest, leaving behind the wreckage, the tragedy, and the questions that would never have easy answers. The forest surrounding the crash site was alive with the quiet hum of nature. The rain had softened to a drizzle, leaving the air cold and damp. Among the towering trees, the earthy smell of wet soil mixed with the scent of crushed leaves and something foreign, the metallic tang of blood. From the shadows, a hulking figure moved with a purposeful silence. A massive grizzly bear, its fur matted from the rain, lumbered toward the wreckage. Its keen nose twitched, following the strange combination of scents that had disrupted its usual nightly routine. This bear, a solitary old creature known by local rangers as Gray Claw for the streak of silver running through one of its paws, was a seasoned predator. It had lived through many seasons, navigating the harsh winters and fierce storms of the mountains. Yet this scent trail was unlike any it had encountered, an intriguing mix of human sweat, motor oil, and the unmistakable cry of something small and vulnerable. The bear reached the clearing where the car had landed. The wreckage crumpled like a discarded toy. Steam hissed from the bent hood, mingling with the mist that clung to the ground. Its dark, intelligent eyes scanned the scene, lingering on the twisted metal, the faint movement within. Greyclaw growled low, a sound that vibrated through the stillness. Slowly, it approached, its massive paws sinking into the rain-soaked ground. Inside the car, the baby's cries echoed faintly. Oliver's small body trembled in his car seat, his tiny fists clenched in distress. The bear paused, tilting its head at the noise. For a moment, Greyclaw stood completely still, its gaze fixed on the child. There was no sign of aggression in its posture, no hint of the wild ferocity that had helped it survive for so long. Instead, there was a peculiar calmness, as if the bear understood the fragility of the creature before it. It circled the car, sniffing at the air, the ground, the metal, until it reached the shattered window nearest to the baby. Carefully, it nudged the car with its nose, testing its stability. The vehicle creaked and shifted slightly, but the bear didn't flinch. Oliver's cries softened, almost as if the presence of the massive creature brought an odd kind of comfort. Greyclaw lowered its massive head, peering through the broken window. The child's wide, tear-filled eyes met the bear's deep, black ones. For a moment, the two stared at each other, a silent exchange between two beings separated by worlds, yet brought together by fate. The bear reached a paw inside the car, its claws curling around the edge of the baby's car seat. It tugged gently, testing the weight. The seat shifted, and Oliver let out a startled squeal. The bear froze, then resumed its task with even greater care. With surprising precision, Greyclaw managed to pull the car seat free from the wreckage. The baby's cries echoed again, but this time they seemed less frantic. The bear paused once more, as if to ensure the child was unharmed. Then, holding the car seat in its jaws, Greyclaw began to move. Its powerful frame disappeared into the shadows of the forest, carrying the infant away from the wreckage and into the unknown. The rain finally stopped, leaving a deep, unsettling silence in its wake. The wreckage lay abandoned, a haunting reminder of the night's events. As Greyclaw's massive form melted into the darkness, the question lingered. What could compel a creature of the wild to act with such care? Deep within the forest, where sunlight rarely penetrated and shadows danced between towering pines, Greyclaw carried the baby to a secluded area. The car seat swung gently in its jaws, and while the bear's grip seemed precarious, it was surprisingly steady. The forest was alive with muted sounds, the rustling of leaves, the distant calls of nocturnal birds, and the gentle trickling of a nearby stream. Yet, in this moment, the wilderness seemed to hold its breath, watching as the bear made its way to its hidden den. Greyclaw's den was a hollowed-out cave beneath a massive tree, its entrance concealed by tangled roots and ferns. It was a place of safety, a refuge from predators and the elements. The bear ducked its massive head, carefully maneuvering the car seat through the narrow opening. Inside, the air was damp but warm, insulated by layers of moss and dried leaves. Greyclaw placed the car seat on the soft ground and paused, its nostrils flaring as it assessed the child. Oliver's cries had quieted to soft whimpers, his tiny body trembling in confusion and fear. His wide, teary eyes scanned the unfamiliar surroundings, landing on the massive form of the bear. Instead of panic, there was an odd sense of calm in the baby's gaze, as if the primal instincts of both child and beast recognized something beyond danger. A strange but undeniable bond. Greyclaw sat back on its haunches, observing the baby with a curious intensity. Then, with a gentleness that defied its size, the bear used its paw to nudge the car seat, rocking it slightly. The motion was awkward but soothing, and Oliver began to coo softly. The bear turned and lumbered to the entrance of the den, sniffing the air. The rain had stopped, but the scents of the forest were alive with activity. Predators stirred, their instincts heightened by the crash. Greyclaw growled low, a deep rumble that reverberated through the trees, a warning to any intruder that this den was now under its protection. Satisfied that no immediate threat lingered, the bear returned to the child. It reached out with its massive paw and, using surprising dexterity, pulled apart the straps of the car seat. The baby squirmed, but the bear's movements were deliberate, almost calculated. Once free, Oliver was placed on a bed of moss and leaves. Greyclaw sniffed the baby again, its warm breath causing the child to giggle softly. The sound was foreign to the bear, yet it paused, tilting its head as though processing the noise. Slowly, Greyclaw lay down, its massive body curled protectively around the child, shielding him from the chill of the forest night. Morning came, and the first rays of sunlight filtered through the dense canopy. Greyclaw rose, careful not to disturb the baby, and left the den. It wandered to a nearby stream, catching fish with expert precision, and collected a handful of berries from a bush it had frequented for years. Returning to the den, it placed the offerings near the baby, as if instinctively trying to provide nourishment. Oliver's tiny hands reached for the berries, and though he was too young to eat them on his own, his curiosity was unmistakable. Over the hours and days that followed, the bond between bear and baby grew. Greyclaw's actions became increasingly maternal, nudging Oliver to a warmer spot in the den, sheltering him from the rain, and even growling away smaller predators that ventured too close. From an outside perspective, the sight was surreal, a creature of raw power and untamed wildness caring for a fragile human child. Yet, to Greyclaw, it was an unexplainable duty, one that transcended instinct and biology. As the forest whispered its secrets to the wind, Greyclaw and Oliver shared a quiet understanding, one that would change the fate of both forever. Nestled deep within the heart of the forest, the den was a hidden sanctuary that had sheltered Greyclaw through countless seasons. Carved into the base of a massive ancient tree, its entrance was obscured by a thick curtain of hanging roots and moss. The forest around it was dense and teeming with life, a symphony of rustling leaves, chirping insects, and the occasional distant howl of a predator. Greyclaw carried the baby carefully in its jaws, taking a circuitous path to avoid the open areas of the forest where larger predators prowled. The bear's movements were slow and deliberate, its ears swiveling constantly to detect the faintest sound of danger. As they approached the den, the forest seemed to grow quieter, as though the creatures within it respected the bear's domain. Greyclaw stopped just outside the entrance, lowering the baby onto a patch of soft moss. For a moment, it scanned the surroundings, ensuring no threat had followed. Then, with a soft grunt, it nudged the baby into the den's shadowy interior. Inside, the den was a testament to the bear's years of survival. The ground was padded with layers of dried leaves, fur, and moss, creating a warm and comfortable bedding area. The air smelled earthy, with faint traces of the bear's musky scent. The walls of the den were smoothed by time, their curves lined with claw marks and scratches from past winters spent sheltering here. Greyclaw settled the baby onto the softest part of the bedding. Oliver squirmed slightly, his tiny hands reaching out into the dimness. The baby's cries had subsided to soft coos, and he looked around with wide, curious eyes, his gaze darting between the flickering shadows and the massive creature that loomed protectively nearby. The bear watched the child with an intensity that belied its wild nature. It sniffed him again, its warm breath causing Oliver to giggle softly. Greyclaw tilted its head, as though perplexed by the strange sounds the baby made. Slowly, it curled up beside the child, its enormous body shielding him from the chilly forest air. The baby, unafraid, rested his tiny hand on the bear's fur. Greyclaw remained still, its deep, rhythmic breaths creating a soothing hum that lulled Oliver to sleep. As the days passed, the den transformed from a mere shelter into an unlikely home. Each morning, Greyclaw would venture out, its powerful frame disappearing into the forest. It returned with offerings from nature, plump berries, fresh fish, and even roots it had dug from the ground. The bear instinctively laid these near the baby, nudging the food closer with its nose. Though too young to eat the bear's offerings, Oliver responded with fascination. He reached for the vibrant berries, smearing their juice on his tiny hands. Greyclaw observed this behavior with a kind of quiet approval, gently licking the baby's hands clean, its rough tongue careful not to harm the delicate skin. At night, the forest outside came alive with the calls of nocturnal predators. Greyclaw stood guard at the den's entrance, its massive silhouette a silent warning to any creature daring to approach. Within the den, Oliver thrived under the bear's care. The once fragile baby now giggled and cooed, his cries becoming rare. His tiny movements grew more confident, and he began to crawl clumsily across the soft bedding. The other creatures of the forest seemed to take notice of this peculiar pair. Squirrels peered curiously from the branches above, their tiny heads tilting in unison as they watched the bear's unusual guest. Birds fluttered near the den's entrance, chirping cautiously. Even the cunning foxes that roamed nearby kept a respectful distance, sensing that this den was under the protection of the forest's most formidable guardian. Yet, amidst the oddity of this situation, an unspoken harmony emerged. The den became a microcosm of trust and care, a place where the boundaries between human and beast faded, replaced by a bond neither could fully understand. One quiet night, as the moonlight filtered through the canopy, illuminating the entrance of the den, Greyclaw lay beside Oliver. The baby stirred in his sleep, his tiny hand resting on the bear's fur. For the first time, Greyclaw let out a soft, low sound, not a growl, but a gentle rumble that seemed almost like a lullaby. The den, a place once meant for solitude and survival, had become something far more extraordinary, a sanctuary of compassion and connection, where a creature of the wild and an innocent child shared a story that defied nature's harsh rules. As days turned into weeks, something profound began to form between Greyclaw and Oliver, a bond that neither nature nor logic could explain. At first, it was subtle, born out of necessity and curiosity, but slowly, it deepened into something extraordinary. Greyclaw, despite its wild instincts, adapted its behavior around the baby. It learned to tread lightly when moving near Oliver, its massive paws careful not to disturb the fragile child. When Oliver cried, Greyclaw would lower its head close to him, letting out a series of soft, guttural sounds. Strangely, these deep rumbles soothed the baby, quieting his cries almost instantly. The baby, too, seemed to understand the bear in ways no one would have thought possible. When Greyclaw growled low to warn of an approaching predator, Oliver would stop moving and remain perfectly still, as if sensing the danger. When the bear nudged food toward him, berries or softened fish, the baby would giggle and reach out, though he wasn't old enough to eat them. Each interaction between them seemed to transcend their natural boundaries, as though they spoke a language without words, a language of trust and mutual understanding. One afternoon, the forest was alive with sunlight filtering through the canopy, creating patches of warmth on the ground. Oliver crawled around the den, exploring his surroundings with a child's innocent curiosity. Greyclaw watched him closely, its eyes following his every move. When Oliver reached for a sharp twig near the edge of the den, the bear intervened swiftly but gently. It used its massive paw to push the twig away, its claws retracting instinctively to avoid harming the child. The baby looked up at the bear, his wide eyes meeting Greyclaw's intense gaze. Then, in a moment that would have seemed impossible to any onlooker, Oliver smiled and reached out, placing his tiny hand on the bear's nose. Greyclaw didn't move, its massive body frozen as if aware of the significance of the gesture. The bear let out a soft, almost inaudible huff, and Oliver giggled, his laughter echoing in the quiet forest. As their bond grew, so did their interactions. Greyclaw began to exhibit playful behavior around the baby, something rare for a creature of its kind. It would roll small stones toward Oliver, watching as the child clumsily pushed them back. The den echoed with Oliver's giggles and the occasional rumbling growl of the bear, not of aggression, but of amusement. Outside the den, Greyclaw even allowed Oliver to ride on its back, carrying him through the forest. The sight of the massive bear with the tiny child perched on its broad shoulders would have been unbelievable to anyone who might have witnessed it. One night, a fierce storm rolled in, shaking the forest with howling winds and thunder that echoed like a drumbeat. Rain poured down in sheets, and lightning illuminated the trees in blinding flashes. Inside the den, Oliver whimpered, startled by the storm. Greyclaw moved closer to the child, curling its massive body around him like a fortress. The bear's warmth and steady breathing created a cocoon of safety, shielding Oliver from the chaos outside. When the thunder boomed loudly, Oliver cried out, his tiny hands clutching at the bear's fur. Greyclaw responded by nuzzling the baby gently, its nose brushing against his cheek. Slowly, the baby's cries subsided, replaced by the soft sound of his breathing as he drifted off to sleep. For the rest of the night, Greyclaw remained vigilant, its eyes watching the storm outside, but its body unmoving, protecting the child it had come to see as its own. The bond between Greyclaw and Oliver wasn't just an anomaly, it was a miracle of nature. A predator and a human infant, united by chance, had found a way to coexist, their connection defying the rules of survival and instinct. Greyclaw, once a solitary creature of the wild, had found purpose in caring for the baby, and Oliver, who had lost everything in the crash, had found an unlikely protector, a guardian that would stand against the dangers of the forest to ensure his survival. Their connection wasn't just about survival, it was about understanding, trust, and a shared sense of belonging that transcended species and circumstance. Together, they had forged a bond that was as mysterious as it was beautiful. A story that the forest would carry for generations. The quiet hum of the forest was broken by the distant whirring of helicopters and the sharp barking of search dogs. In the aftermath of the car crash, the world outside the forest had mobilized, desperate to find the missing child. News of the accident spread quickly. The mangled car had been discovered at the base of a steep ravine, its metal frame twisted beyond recognition. Rescuers had pulled the bodies of the driver and passenger from the wreckage, but there was no sign of the baby who had been strapped into the back seat. Oliver's family, grief-stricken and clinging to hope, demanded a full-scale search. Flyers bearing the baby's smiling face were plastered across nearby towns. His story dominated the news, with headlines reading, "Baby missing after fatal crash, forest search intensifies." The authorities, aware of the dangers the dense forest posed, assembled a team of skilled trackers, volunteers, and wildlife experts. Search dogs were deployed to sniff out any trace of the child, while drones and helicopters scanned the forest canopy from above. The search teams quickly realized the enormity of their task. The forest was vast and untamed, its terrain treacherous and filled with hidden dangers. Thick underbrush and towering trees made visibility almost impossible in some areas. Streams and rivers crisscrossed the land, complicating the search as the waters could easily wash away any scent trails. "There's no telling what's out here," one searcher muttered, his voice heavy with concern. "Predators, cliffs, weather. We need to move fast." Each day brought new challenges. The search dogs struggled to maintain the baby's scent, and the heavy rains that had followed the crash had washed away most physical traces. Still, the teams pressed on, shouting Oliver's name and scanning every inch of the forest floor for signs of the missing child. On the third day, a breakthrough came. A volunteer stumbled upon a discarded piece of fabric near a stream, the strap of a baby's car seat. The search team marked the spot and widened their efforts in the surrounding area. Not far from there, a wildlife tracker noticed unusual bear tracks leading deeper into the forest. "These prints are fresh," he said, pointing to the impressions in the mud. "But look here, the pattern changes. The bear's been carrying something heavy." The idea was met with a mix of hope and dread. Could the bear have taken the baby? And if so, was it for protection or something far worse? With this new lead, the search effort intensified. Wildlife experts joined the team, explaining the habits of bears and warning of the potential danger to the child. Helicopters circled lower, their searchlights cutting through the dense forest canopy, while ground teams tracked the bear's movements using its fresh prints. Every moment felt critical. "A baby can't survive out here alone," one of the rescuers said. "If that bear has him, we need to find them now." The searchers ventured deeper into the forest than anyone had before, navigating steep inclines, crossing roaring rivers, and enduring the unrelenting chill of the forest nights. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the search team prepared to halt for the day, a distant sound stopped them in their tracks. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. A baby's cry. The sound galvanized the team. They moved swiftly in its direction, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The cry grew louder, and with it came the deep, rumbling growl of a bear. The rescuers froze, their hearts racing. "Everyone stay calm," whispered one of the wildlife experts. "We don't want to provoke it." They crept forward cautiously, their eyes scanning the dense foliage. Then, through the shadows, they saw it. The massive silhouette of a bear standing protectively at the entrance of its den. The search team hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. But then, as they watched, the bear turned slightly, revealing the child nestled safely in a bed of moss and leaves inside the den. Oliver was awake, his tiny hand gripping the bear's fur. The sight was surreal. The bear's posture was not one of aggression, but of quiet guardianship. One of the rescuers stepped forward slowly, holding out his hands in a gesture of peace. "We're here to help," he said softly, though his voice trembled. The bear let out a low growl, but it didn't attack. Instead, it stepped back slightly, as if understanding that the humans meant no harm. With extreme care, the team approached the den. Two rescuers gently lifted Oliver into their arms, his tiny face lighting up with a smile as he babbled innocently. As they retreated with the baby, Greyclaw watched from the shadows. It let out one final huff before retreating into the depths of the forest, vanishing as quietly as it had appeared. Oliver was safe. The news spread quickly, and the world marveled at the story of the baby and the bear. Yet, for those who had seen the connection firsthand, it was more than just a rescue. It was a glimpse into the extraordinary, a reminder that compassion could exist in the most unexpected places. The forest was alive with the sounds of the search team closing in, the hum of radio chatter, the crunch of boots on underbrush, and the faint cry of Oliver echoing through the trees. As the rescuers followed the sound, their flashlights pierced the darkening forest, illuminating patches of greenery, tree trunks, and the glinting eyes of curious wildlife. The tension was palpable. Every step brought them closer to the child, but also closer to the unknown. When the team finally arrived at the den, they were greeted by a sight that defied belief. There, in the clearing illuminated by the soft glow of their flashlights, stood Greyclaw. The massive bear towered over them, its fur gleaming in the dim light. Its head was low, ears pinned slightly back, and it growled softly, not in aggression, but in warning. Between its enormous paws was Oliver, sitting unscathed, his wide eyes gazing curiously at the approaching humans. The rescuers froze. "What do we do?" one of them whispered, his voice trembling. A wildlife expert in the group quickly assessed the situation. "Stay calm. Do not make sudden movements. It's not attacking, it's protecting." For a moment that felt like an eternity, the rescuers and the bear stared at each other. Oliver, oblivious to the tension, reached up and tugged gently at Greyclaw's fur, giggling softly. The sight sent a wave of astonishment through the group. This was no act of predation. The bear wasn't holding the baby hostage or acting on primal instincts. Instead, it appeared to be guarding him. The leader of the search team stepped forward slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. "We're here to help," he said in a calm, steady voice. "We just want to take the baby home." Greyclaw's eyes flicked to him, then back to the child. It let out a low rumble, the sound vibrating through the air. Then, something extraordinary occurred. As the rescuer knelt and extended his hands toward the baby, Greyclaw shifted. The bear, known for its immense strength and ferocity, lowered its head and gently nudged Oliver forward with its massive snout. The rescuers gasped audibly. Is it letting us take him?" one of them whispered in disbelief. Oliver gurgled happily, his tiny hands reaching toward the approaching rescuer. The man moved cautiously, picking up the baby with trembling hands. The child clung to him immediately, cooing contentedly as if he understood he was finally going home. Greyclaw, now standing fully upright, let out one last deep growl, not in anger, but almost as a farewell. It turned and lumbered away into the shadows of the forest, its massive form disappearing into the darkness as quickly as it had appeared. The rescuers stood in stunned silence, their hearts pounding. "Did that just happen?" one of them asked, his voice barely audible. "Not only did it protect him," another whispered, "it gave him back to us." The weight of what they had witnessed sank in. A wild predator, one of the most fearsome creatures of the forest, had not only spared a human child, but had also nurtured and safeguarded him until help arrived. Oliver, now safe in the arms of his rescuers, looked around with wide, curious eyes. He babbled happily, seemingly unaware of the magnitude of what had just occurred. As the team made their way back to their base, the story of the encounter began to spread. Wildlife experts were baffled, unable to explain the bear's behavior. Biologists debated whether it was a fluke of instinct or something deeper, an act of empathy perhaps, or a rare connection between two vulnerable beings. The world was captivated by the story. News outlets covered the incident in awe, labeling it a miracle. But for those who had been there, the moment wasn't just shocking, it was humbling. It was a reminder of the mysterious bond between humans and the natural world, a bond that defied logic and transcended fear. As the rescuers emerged from the dense forest with Oliver in their arms, the world beyond the trees erupted in emotion. A waiting crowd of family members, journalists, and volunteers cheered and cried, their relief palpable. Oliver's safe return felt like a miracle, but the story of how it happened would leave everyone stunned. Oliver was quickly reunited with his extended family, who had been praying and hoping for days. His grandmother clutched him tightly, tears streaming down her face as she whispered words of gratitude. "He's unharmed," the medical team assured them after a thorough examination. A few scratches and signs of dehydration, but nothing serious. But as the rescuers began to recount the tale of the bear, the mood shifted from relief to astonishment. The rescuers described the incredible encounter in vivid detail, how they had followed the bear's tracks, heard Oliver's cries, and found the child alive and well under the care of a massive bear. The bear's behavior defied logic. Wildlife experts were called in to analyze the situation. "It's unheard of," one expert said. "Bears are instinctively territorial and predatory. For it to protect a human child is extraordinary." News outlets picked up the story immediately, broadcasting headlines like, "Forest Miracle, Baby Protected by Bear for Days After Accident. Guardian of the Wild, Bear Saves Infant in Unlikely Rescue." Social media erupted with awe and speculation. People debated whether the bear's actions were driven by instinct, empathy, or something entirely unknown. Despite the whirlwind of media attention, Oliver seemed blissfully unaware of the chaos. He laughed and played in his grandmother's arms, his innocence untouched by the trauma of the past days. The rescuers, too, were deeply affected. Many of them spoke of the emotional weight of the encounter, how witnessing the bear's protective instincts had changed their perspective on nature. "It wasn't just an animal," one rescuer said during an interview. "It acted with a purpose. It wasn't just surviving, it was saving." Biologists and ethologists around the world began studying the incident. Some proposed that the bear might have mistaken Oliver's cries for the calls of its own cub. Others suggested that the bear's unusual behavior could stem from unique circumstances, like a lack of maternal instincts in the absence of cubs. Cultural interpretations were just as varied. In folklore, bears often symbolize strength and protection. Many communities viewed the bear's actions as a spiritual event, a sign that the natural world still holds mysteries humans cannot fully understand. Back in the forest, Greyclaw returned to its solitary life. Sightings of the bear were rare, but occasionally reported by hikers and wildlife enthusiasts. Locals spoke of the bear with reverence, calling it the Guardian. A conservation group even launched an initiative to protect the forest area where the events had occurred. They hoped to preserve the habitat that had not only sustained the bear, but had also fostered the miraculous encounter. For Oliver's family, the ordeal left a deep mark. They established a foundation in honor of the rescuers and the bear, dedicated to wildlife preservation and educating people about the delicate balance between humanity and nature. As Oliver grew older, his family often told him the story of his incredible survival, how a wild bear became his protector in the darkest days. Though he wouldn't remember the event firsthand, the bond between him and the natural world remained evident. He often pointed at pictures of bears with a joyful laugh, as if recognizing a long-lost friend. The story of Oliver and Greyclaw became legend, a tale retold in books, documentaries, and even children's bedtime stories. But for those who had lived through it, it was more than a story. It was a testament to the unexpected kindness that can arise in the wildest of places. In the end, the bear's actions reminded humanity of a simple truth, that even in the untamed heart of nature, there exists a capacity for compassion, connection, and the extraordinary. Months passed since Oliver's miraculous rescue, but the story of the baby and the bear lingered in the hearts of all who had witnessed or heard of it. It had become a tale of legend, one that transcended the boundaries of ordinary events and made people question the very nature of the wild. Yet, as time went on, there remained a quiet, unsettling presence, a reminder that some mysteries, however awe-inspiring, are not easily put to rest. The world had moved on, but the family was left with a sense of disquiet. Oliver's grandmother, who had been the most affected by the ordeal, found it hard to shake the memories of those first hours after the crash. The images of the wreck, the cries of her grandson, and, most hauntingly, the silhouette of the bear guarding him, had been seared into her mind. Though Oliver was healthy and thriving, the recurring dreams of the bear's watchful eyes had begun to disturb her sleep. She would wake in a cold sweat, hearing the rustle of leaves in the night, thinking she could hear the soft growls of Greyclaw from the depths of the forest. It wasn't fear of the bear itself, but something deeper, something unresolved, that lingered like a shadow. One evening, just as the last light of dusk faded, Oliver's mother decided to take him on a walk through the woods. It was a peaceful walk, a way to reconnect with nature and allow Oliver to feel the freedom of the outdoors once more. They had made their way deep into the forest, past the areas where the accident had occurred. The forest was quiet, save for the occasional bird call and the distant sound of a stream. They stopped near a clearing to rest, sitting on a large rock near a bed of moss. Oliver played with the leaves, tossing them into the air with a soft giggle. That's when it happened. From the corner of her eye, Oliver's mother caught a fleeting glimpse, a shadow moving at the edge of the clearing. Her breath caught in her throat. Was it a deer? A wolf? Or perhaps, she thought with a sudden chill, the same bear that had saved her son. She turned, but the shadow was gone. Just as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished into the trees. A few days later, while walking along the forest's edge, Oliver's mother noticed something that would forever haunt her. She found a large paw print, fresh and deep, imprinted in the mud near the path. It was unmistakably the print of a bear. But this wasn't any ordinary bear print. The edges were soft, almost as if the bear had been walking carefully, not out of instinct, but of purpose. There was a faint but undeniable sense that the creature was close, too close perhaps to be a coincidence. As she knelt to examine the print, Oliver tugged at her sleeve. His wide eyes were fixed on the forest ahead, and his innocent voice called out, "Bear." She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never mentioned the bear to Oliver. He was far too young to remember anything about that day. But here he was, identifying it with an eerie certainty. The days that followed felt like a slow unraveling. Despite efforts to move on and resume normal life, the quiet moments were filled with an unsettling sense of being watched. Whenever Oliver wandered too far into the yard or played near the forest's edge, his mother would feel that strange pull of unease, as if the very air around her had thickened, as if something invisible and powerful was observing them. Oliver's grandmother, too, began to sense it. She would glance out of her window and swear she saw movement among the trees, the figure of something large, dark, and unyielding. The wildlife experts who had studied the bear's behavior continued their analysis, concluding that Greyclaw was likely a solitary, reclusive animal, not one to stray too far from its domain. But even they couldn't explain the unshakable feeling that lingered in the area, the sensation that the bear was still near, even after all this time. It was late one autumn evening, as the wind howled through the trees, when Oliver's mother sat alone by the fire, the room filled with the crackling of burning wood. Suddenly, a faint sound reached her ears. It was subtle at first, just a low rustling from outside. But as the wind shifted, she heard something clearer, a deep, rumbling growl, too soft to be a threat, but unmistakable in its familiarity. Her heart raced. It was the same sound she had heard that day in the forest, just before the bear had stepped into view. She stood up, trembling, and moved toward the door. She opened it slowly, peering into the darkness, but there was nothing, just the wind, the swaying trees, and the quiet night. But the feeling persisted. She was not alone. Though the search for Greyclaw had ended months ago, questions lingered in the air like an unspoken truth. What had caused the bear to act so differently that day? Why had it protected Oliver, nurturing him as its own? And, perhaps most haunting of all, why did it seem as if the bear was still watching over him, even now? The locals began to speak of the encounter with reverence, as if it were not merely a rescue, but a shared experience between humans and nature. They spoke of Greyclaw as a guardian spirit, one that would forever be part of their lives. For Oliver's family, the bear's protection had been both a blessing and a curse. Though Oliver was safe and life had resumed, the quiet reminders, the paw prints, the growls, the feeling of being watched, would never leave them. It was as if the forest itself had claimed a part of their hearts, a piece that would never return. In the end, they realized that while the bear had brought Oliver back to them, it had also left behind a haunting reminder. The wild, untamed world is not something that can ever truly be understood or contained. And sometimes, the creatures within it leave their mark in ways no human could ever predict.